Good evening and welcome to Toolbox Tuesday. I'm Renee Powell with Oklahoma Family Network. We are so fortunate tonight to have Amy Lewis Sinar with Oklahoma Parents with us tonight. Amy is the Director of Communications and an Information and Training Specialist with the Oklahoma Parents Center. As a parent-child advocate and Director of Communications, she has gained a wealth of experience advising, informing, training, advocating, and empowering self-advocates, families, and professionals regarding discrimination laws, special education, disabilities, rehabilitation services. She has a considerable amount of knowledge of rules and regulations regarding implementing the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or the IDEA, Early Intervention Services and Youth Transition Services, the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, Section 504, and the Americans with Disabilities Act. Amy can facilitate, mediate, and assist members of the Individual Educational Program, the IEP team, in resolving conflicts. She has demonstrated a commitment to working effectively with individuals of diverse economic, cultural, ethnic, and social backgrounds. In her current role, she has also developed training materials, including PowerPoint presentations and scripts, and has facilitated in-person and recorded training sessions via web-based platforms. Amy, we are so excited to have you here, and just to let you know, this session is being recorded for educational purposes. And feel free to ask questions during the presentation or to drop them in the chat, and then I can facilitate that. But thank you, Amy, and I'm going to turn my
Just listening to that bio, it reminds me I am so educated and informed. Like, wow, I didn't realize I was that good. So thank you again, Renee, for allowing me to be a part of OFM's training programs to help facilitate and educate and train, inform, and empower parents, self-advocates, and professionals to learn more about what their rights and responsibilities are under the IDEA and the two federal civil rights laws, Section 504 and the Rehabilitation Act. And the Americans with Disabilities Act. I apologize. So today we're going to talk a little bit about what is the difference between an IEP and Section 504. So let's get going here. The Oklahoma Parent Center is funded through the federal and state departments of education under the federal special education law called the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. There's to be a parent training center in every state in the nation, and the Oklahoma Parent Center has won that grant for the last 25 years. To be a parent training information center is that we are to educate, train, and inform, again, parents, self-advocates, professionals about what are their rights and responsibilities. We provide case management. We help with individuals that are considering filing a state complaint, due process, mediation, that type of thing, to at least give some information about those procedural safeguards. But again, today we are going to talk about Section 504 and the IEP. Just a few Zoom reminders. It says keep microphones muted, but I do want to encourage everyone, if they have questions, be mindful about personal information. I am a pretty easygoing person, so if you have a question, stop me. I love to answer questions. I think that if anything, it just helps make sure that I am gaining some you are gaining some understanding. So if I'm not making myself clear, so please stop. The goals of the training is to learn a little bit about the history of disability law, the differences between the IEP and 504 plan, eligibility under each program, requirements, and parental notice. So how did we get here? So, as we look back in history, Brown versus Board of Education, who would have thought that would have been the precursor to special education law? In the Brown case, the Supreme Court determined it was illegal to discriminate against a group of school-age children, separate but equal education. The Supreme Court ruling informed school districts that they can't provide different education based on race or other discriminatory or arbitrary demographics. Segregation and exclusion from public schools violated students' rights to an equal education. So that particular Supreme Court ruling is what sparked a national grassroots program to form parents and self-advocates that were wanting to have to be educated in a public school environment, which brought us to 1975, where the first rendition or the first version of IDEA was the education for all handicapped children. Then came, I'm sorry, I should have stepped back. First was 1973 was that Rehabilitation Act. And that was originally intended for returning veterans that had disabilities, injuries that maybe were precluding them from receiving job opportunities. And so that law, it was a civil right that protect them from discriminatory practices. Now, while they were signing that law, they were able to scooch in Section 504, which is where that civil right also provided protections for the student that had disabilities in public schools. And we'll get into more of that. So then in 1975, the education for handicapped children. And then we come in with 1990 was the first, another version, which brought us the IDEA, or the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And that same year was the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. So let's remember, Section 504 and the Americans with Disabilities Act are civil rights that protect individuals with disabilities from discriminatory practices from birth to death. Okay? So disability rights are civil rights, and we'll drill down a little bit more into that. So the key differences and similarities. So under IDEA, a disability is where the disability adversely affects a student's ability to learn and requires special education services to make progress. So again, the team would come together, they would look at data through a decision process called consensus. The team would determine if a student meets the qualifications under IDEA as a student with a disability that requires special education services to make progress. And so then that IEP would be developed by that team. Again, consensus. It's not majority rule. What does consensus mean to me? It means that, no one's walking out of a meeting and thinking everybody's a winner. Decisions are being made that they can live with, and it's all through conversation. That seems to be something that's hard for a lot of teams to kind of overcome, because there is this assumption. But when you think about it, you think about who's on a team, an IEP team. That would be the parent. This is the broad-based, bare bones member of a team. Would be the parent, would be a special education teacher, a general education teacher, an administrator, and the student, if applicable. So that's the bare bones. And as you can see, if a parent is there and they're outnumbered, really their voice isn't going to be heard. through consensus, the opportunity for a parent to be heard is so much greater. So I want you to feel empowered when you hear that information, when you go to an IEP, maybe gently remind the team, I am so happy to be here as a part of this process of consensus. And if you have any questions regarding what is a consensus, let's talk about it. So feel empowered in that regard. IDEA also meets the unique needs of the student. And then again, that IEP, that individual education plan, is developed through the data and through consensus of the team members. So looking at a Section 504 plan, it looks at the disability that substantially limits one or more major life activity. It does ensure equal access. It does ensure that there's equity in that general education classroom with appropriate accommodations. Now, let's go back and think about what's in that IEP. An IEP would have goals, would identify what are the unique needs of that student and build is strength-based, and IEPs to be strength-based, and would use those needs and then prepare goals that will help bridge that gap. And then there's also accommodations or modifications in there. There's related services. There's specifically designed instruction in an IEP. A Section 504 is not special education. It allows equal access in a general education setting, meaning the student does have it. The team is recognizing the student has a disability, but only that disability they're required to provide accommodations for them to have equal access to the classroom and to the subject matter at hand. And that could be anything from, a student might meet the criteria for a 504 plan because, maybe there's mobility issues and they require a wheelchair, making sure that the hallway or the classroom, the desks are wide enough apart for the wheelchair to get through. There's a variety of different things. Any questions about that? No? Okay.
I have a question actually.
Yeah, go ahead.
When you're dealing with a child with hearing loss, what more often than not, do you see more families or more students asking for IEPs or Section 504? And I realize every situation is different, but that's kind of just like a global question.
Any student that has a disability, it would be in the best interest of the team to first rule out if a student has special education needs. That would be something for a team, for a family member to consider requesting child find. A school district is obligated to locate, identify, and evaluate any child that is suspected of having a disability that adversely affects their ability to learn. And that's where it's so important it would be ideal to ensure first that student doesn't have a disability that's adversely affecting their ability to learn, and just move straight to a 504 plan where it's just only recognizing the disability and providing accommodations. It would be a good thing for the team to consider doing an initial evaluation just to ensure that they are meeting one of the first principles under the IDEA is called FAPE, free and appropriate public education. Under both laws, federal laws, as a school district is to provide a free and appropriate public education under Section 504 and IDEA. So just to eliminate that possibility, it would be reasonable for a team to consider child bind. Does that help?
Definitely. You introduced a new term, child buying. Is it child
Child,
buying? Child find?
child bind.
Find. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Would you mind explaining that concept of
Sure.
child find?
Yeah, so under the IDEA, again, there is a section where a school district is to educate, train, and, or, excuse me, locate, identify, and evaluate any child that is suspected of having a disability. So oftentimes school districts, you might see like advertisements on TV that the school district is saying, you know, we're getting ready for school. If you suspect that your child might have a disability that requires special education services, contact this number. So, and are on their website, it might say child find. And, you know, what is the process for that district to be notified that there is a student, that someone, whether it's a parent, an aunt, a teacher, maybe a preschool teacher, or even a high school science teacher might suspect that a student might have a disability, and it would be in their best interest to be considered to have an evaluation for special education services. So there you go. That's child find.
Thank you. And
Sure.
I'm sure you're going to explain the process of how a parent would request you know, you know, an eval for special ed versus like accommodations for a 504. So I'm not going to ask that question. I'm going to let you get to it.
Okay. So the next, what we got going on is more key differences and similarities between IDEA and Section 504. IDEA applies to students with specific disabilities. So under the IDEA, there's 13 different categories, and we'll go over that. And IDEA requires that a IEP provides services and accommodations, and requires also parent involvement when making those IEP decisions. Meaningful parental participation is what that's looking at. Section 504 applies to those students with disabilities or impairments. It provides services and accommodations. Again, equal access, but does not have any legal provision or requirement for parent involvement. So as we move in more about what are the differences and similarities under IDEA, there are more protections for a parent and child under IDEA than Section 504. Again, what is offered in terms of a procedural safeguard under 504 would be a Office of Civil Rights complaint, which is a big deal, don't get me wrong. But that's really one of the procedural safeguards offered under Section 504. So harken back to that free and appropriate public education, again, under both laws, there's to be a free and appropriate public education. Each law provides that for a student. Under the IDEA, it goes a step further. Not only does the student is provided a free and appropriate public education, but it must be in the least restrictive environment. It requires an IEP to provide services and has annual goals and a annual meeting to meet with the parent, the team together to make sure that the student is making appropriate progress. Under the Section 504, cannot be, there are no direct special education services. There is no annual meeting or goals. protections do not require a 504 plan, but your school or workplace must be notified. So again, that's essentially where you are disclosing that a student has a 504 plan, and the school district or 504 needs has a disability and requires accommodations, and they must provide it because a person has disclosed. That's what's so important. So who's eligible? Criteria-based eligibility must fall under one of 3 or 13 categories, and disability affects educational performance and ability to learn. That's IDEA. So let's go through that. The criteria based on eligibility. So, okay, let's imagine that a mom has contacted the school district and said, I suspect that my child has autism. He is 4 years old and will be coming from a daycare setting, and he'll be enrolling in a pre-kindergarten program. But I suspect I also have a diagnosis, and you can provide that information if you have it. It's not necessary. But you have contacted the school district, you suspect that he has a disability. The school district is then obligated to perform an initial evaluation or child find. Initial evaluation is where we would look at the whole student. We're looking at all the different categories, social, emotional. We're looking at cognitive, we're looking at adaptive skills, functional skills. Again, that social emotional, those 5 components, that whole child, full and comprehensive evaluation to determine, does this child meet the criteria under IDEA to receive special education. So once all that data has been produced by the school district, remember, free and appropriate, the parent is not to pay for it. This is the responsibility of the school district. And the team would get together and they would have an eligibility meeting, and they would look at all the data and say, okay, does this child meet the criteria under the law? And the team would say, yes, undoubtedly, yes, the data does indicate that the student does meet criteria, is eligible for special education. That's when the team would move to developing a IEP that would look at, from the data, would look at the strengths of the student and the needs of the student, and use those needs to be the scaffolding, the foundation to help build upon the deficits that the child has indicated through the data. And that's where you would start building on yearly goals that would help try to bridge that gap. And then you would also develop, okay, does the child meet the criteria to require some of the related services that are available, such as OT, speech, PT. Then we've got even related services can go can be limitless. I even had a kiddo that had such severe sensory issues, required aqua therapy to receive FAPE. So that was one of the related services. And also, what is the specifically designed instruction look like? Where is this child going to be placed? Will he be placed in the general education setting with opportunities to be pulled out for resources, for the resource room? Or will the child be in a self-contained classroom? Or maybe they'll have dual teachers in there, a special education teacher and a general education teacher. So it all kind of depends on what are the unique needs of that student. So criteria-based falls within the 13 categories, and disability affects educational performance and ability to learn. Again, we're looking, when we're doing that eligibility meeting, we're looking to see what is the cognition of his child and what is the functionality of a child. And we'll see that oftentimes when we have kiddos that have ADHD or autism, how are they able to function within a classroom? The social emotional component, all of those areas need to be identified. So when in comparison, you can see how rich a child's needs are under an IDEA, under a IEP. It really does encompass a lot of needs, and a lot of supports are then provided. Under Section 504, there's no category required. The disability impairs one or more life activity, and the disability may or may not affect a student's ability to learn. So again, under 504, it's not special education, but it is a situation where they require accommodations to have equitable supports in the general education classroom. Any thoughts on that?
You had said something on, they're required to provide, services under, the IDEA, but you also had said that, could a child receive OT, PT, or anything like that with a 504?
Yes, they can. Yeah, even a behavioral plan.
Oh, wow.
Mhm.
How would a parent, would you just ask for, would that be something who would determine the necessity of that and
Well,
how to implement that?
so, so what's so interesting about the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 and 504 is that underneath the federal law, there isn't even a mention of creating a 504 plan. But through Supreme Court hearings, this has been, creating a 504 plan has been the resolution to ensure that children are receiving FAPE under Section 504, is creating this plan. Now I lost my thought. Shoot. Tell me again your question. I knew there was a
Oh,
reason.
no, just, it was the, how would a family ensure that, or how would they determine if services were necessary, and how would they, under a 504, and how would that be implemented? If there's no team
Really?
meeting or anything like
Yeah,
that, that's just something I'm trying to wrap my mind around.
yeah. So under a 504, there, to ensure that the child is receiving FAPE under Section 504. Oh, there's Alexa. What they created that plan, and they created a 504 team, but it doesn't have any special education service members in that team. It's all general education and the parent and the student, if applicable. And it would be hard to determine without a initial evaluation to determine that they're going to need these services. So that's why I would ask any team to consider requesting child find or an initial evaluation for special education services first, to determine, does the child meet the criteria under the special education law or Section 504, but maybe requires supports to receive equality in a general education setting. Does that help?
Yeah, no, it does. So what you're saying is that there can be a team meeting, but it would all be there's no special education involvement in a 504. If there is a team and a plan, that to me, that seems like the biggest difference.
Yeah, very much so. very much so. Again, 504 is not special education. So we look at these are the 13 categories under IDEA. These are all the categories that are available for services under IDEA. And what is interesting, and I want to remind individuals that are on the training that school districts, team members, IEP team members, do not diagnose. They do determine a category of under what services that a student has been identified. You know, and there are on the special education, State Department special education website, there is a eligibility determination, eligibility evaluation and eligibility handbook that would give you a description of what those categories look like, and then what evaluations are required for a team to determine that what category a student would need on. So just know that the categories is something, it's not a diagnosis. It is a category that best meets the needs under a student's unique needs. You can have a primary category, say autism and their health impairment, where you find ADHD, you know, they co-occur. So maybe, you know, the autism is more significant or more salient of a category, but OHI is present and it needs to be addressed in the IEP. Did we have a question?
No, I had popped that that handbook, the link for the OSCE handbook in the chat.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And you might also want to bring up the policy and procedure handbook too. That's going to give you an outline of IDEA and what is required. And whenever a parent calls me, I give them that link and ask them to download it onto their desktop so they have it and can answer lots of their questions there. So eligibility under a 504 plan is so much more flexible. And again, it can meet an individual's needs from birth to death. And you're looking to see, does the student have a physical or mental impairment? And, you know, typically it can be anything from sickle cell to ADHD. It can be a temporary disability that requires, maybe a student has broken their leg and requires protections to get to class on time, or to, you know, have some flexibility getting to the class on time. Does the student's impairment substantially limit any major life activity, such as breathing, caring for oneself, communicating? You can see that it covers the gamut. In accordance with Section 504 eligibility standards, has the physical and mental impairment substantially limits the major life activity? Does not have a physical mental impairment? So what we're looking for, and I want to kind of talk a little bit about why oftentimes you hear questions such as, wouldn't it be better for a student to have not only a Section 504 plan and an IEP? It would not be in the best interest Okay, so let's think about it this way. Again, Section 504 is a civil right, and I envision it as this great big umbrella that protects anyone that has a disability, and again, from birth to death. And that means it can go from elementary school into high school, and that protection can carry on through college, through employment, through medical, through social activities. Okay, so 504 is that great big law that protects an individual from discriminatory practices, as well as the Americans with Disabilities Act. So automatically with an IEP, that student is automatically covered under Section 504. So you don't need to have double protection. It's already there. It's already assumed. Under IDEA, that student will receive special education services and receive protections and rights under IDEA from age 3 to 26. You know, forever, however long that student is in high school. So, you know, depending on the needs of the student who may need extra time in high school to meet IEP goals, and maybe will be in high school until they're 22, then they're covered under they're covered under the IDEA. But once they've graduated from high school, they're no longer protected under IDEA. Thoughts and questions? Okay. So there is a huge difference between parental notice under Section 504 and IDEA. A parent is given the right to be educated and informed of any changes that are being made to a student's IEP. There's to receive written notice, prior written notice. And then there's the stay put right, where if there is a conflict within an IEP team and the team has determined that, say, a student's behavior is adversely affecting his ability and that of his peers' ability to learn, and he's been placed on a shortened day, and the parent disagrees, that's one of the reasons why a parent may file a due process complaint. Due process is one of your procedural safeguards, and you would essentially be suing the public school to stop changing your student's placement. So until the due process has been completed, then a student will stay put in that original placement until it's what's been brought on through the due process and through the help of a hearing officer will help determine what is the appropriate placement of the student. So stay put. Meetings, written notice, written notice would be after an IEP, you would receive prior written notice about what was discussed in the IEP meeting. Maybe a parent made a request and the team denied the request. Well, in prior written notice, which is one of your first procedural safeguard, you're requesting the team to defend the reason behind the denial in writing. And they also are required to offer suggestions and options that may meet the criteria of reasonable accommodations type. Okay, what is reasonable? What is similar and what is reasonable? Also, another form of prior written notice would be an invitation to an IEP meeting, you know, where it says the location, the time, the date, who's going to be there, what's going to be discussed. You would see invitation to meeting, which is another form of prior written notice. I think that within that scope, parents and students have more protections and rights under IDEA. Then under section 4 or 5, you got notices are not required. Not required to notify parents about small changes in the 504 plan. Notify parents about evaluations. They all only under a 504 plan, the school district must inform a parent and ask for parental consent to do an evaluation for, say, special education if they're going to change a child's placement from a general education setting to special education services. Does that make sense? Parental consent, again, a parent. So let's go back to child find, that parent that has contacted the school district and suspects that the student has a disability. The parent must sign parental consent to do the evaluation first. Then if the team determines that they do meet the criteria as a student with special education needs and requires special education services to make progress, then they must finalize that IEP and sign parental consent before those services can be provided. Under section 504, consent is required for that evaluation process, but does not require parents to agree to services under section 504. So it's like the district is obligated to provide services for that student they're aware of that have a disability, with or without the parent's real involvement. But that's not best practice. It would be best practice for the parent to work with the IEP team or the 504 team as closely as possible, as well as the student if applicable. So you can see there's a real significant difference between IDEA and 504. So I want to also remember that an IEP and a section 504 plan are both federal documents and must be, once a team has agreed upon and finalized an IEP, then it is to be followed by the school. The school's the one that has agreed to it. The team is the one that's agreed to the plan. And they are the ones that are responsible to provide those services to the student. If the IEP is not being followed, remember it's a federal document, then it could be seen as out of compliance with IDEA if the IDP is not being followed. IDEA must include, those annual goals, the services and deliveries and delivery of services. We have a great training on going through what is a child's IEP line by line and talking about what are those specifically designed instruction. What does that look like? The area of accommodations and modifications. And what the transitional services as well. So I recommend anyone coming to join one of our other trainings that we have on understanding your child's IEP. It's very impactful and very important. Then the section 504 will just provide those accommodations and services. Necessary individual supports are written down and overseen by a 504 coordinator. That's been the way the 504 coordinator in the plan is how many school districts have come to be able to, trying to think the best way to explain it, provide the services that the courts have mandated. So providing that IEP program, that 504 plan, and having a 504 coordinator kind of relieves that question of how are they going to provide FAPE. Does that make sense? I feel like I turned that around a little. Okay. So accessing accommodations after high school. So the real term here is that accommodations must be reasonable. What is important for so many individuals that have graduated from high school and have a disability, oftentimes they really struggle with disclosure. And, you know, there could be a variety of different reasons why that is. And this is where I start to talk a little bit about my story. So I am a self-advocate. I was diagnosed with dyslexia after I got my master's from OU. I only knew I had to work so much harder than anybody else, you know, in my mind. I just needed, you know, woe is me. I did not have a clue, you know, that I had ADHD, auditory processing, and dyslexia. And through this journey, and after getting my master's, I have gone through a variety of emotional tidal waves. Everything from, I felt like I was a used car salesman selling used damaged goods. I felt like I had to hide my disability, and it caused so much stress and anxiety and mental health issues. It was just beyond. Hence, we have offering now a support group for individuals between 17 to 22 that have disabilities and are working towards graduating and working towards that transition age. How can we help support them as they ponder the responsibility of disclosure and compare it to maybe the sense of humiliation or shame. But yet, and oftentimes when I share my story, I talk about how much shame and humiliation I felt about all of these situations where I met with so many obstacles, but yet I was resilient enough to keep moving. And now that I'm so much older and wiser, I'm one of the facilitators for this program, as well as my cohort, Hallie Nolan. She's 26. She has autism, and how the two of us are able to share our stories of moving through and understanding our disability and finding a way to be empowered by self-advocating. So we invite anyone to join us this Saturday on Zoom that has a disability and is in high school and is transitioning into adulthood, or maybe has graduated and are frustrated with employment, with social skills, We want to provide a safe place for people. So anyway, that is the Oklahoma Parent Center. Again, we provide case management. We get calls from families, and they're never happy calls. We get parents that call in that are afraid, are grieving, and there is communication breakdown between the parent and the team, and how our job is to help educate, train, inform, as well as empower parents as to how to move forward with appropriate communication skills and to rebuild that bridge to communication with the team. So we're focusing on this child and not on all those external egos. So any questions? What do you have for me?
There was a question in the chat about when is your next Understanding Your Child's IEP training?
Gosh, I know it's up on our website. Shoot,
Is it under trainings?
I believe so. Yeah,
I
yeah.
was looking at, see, it says understanding the difference between IEPs and 504s on August 15th. Okay, you had one on August 8th. Um,
Boy,
am
I
am I in the wrong spot?
no, you're in the right spot. You know what? If we've got I will schedule one ASAP, and I'll have it posted on Zoom, and you can join us from there. It'll probably be another evening training. I know the IEP one is just definitely a much needed plan, and I will make sure that it's up and available for you. I know I am in Tulsa, and we are doing a series of trainings at the Tulsa Tech location and Memorial. And I know we're doing Understanding Your Child's IEP soon. But you can join us there, or I will schedule an IEP meeting, or Understanding Your Child's IEP meetings first thing tomorrow.
So will you put it on the you'll put it under that training section?
Yeah, I'll have it on there, and I can send you the link, Renee, and if you want to, you can share it too.
Definitely. So do you guys provide any type of like somebody attending like an IEP meeting or any how would a parent request something like that?
So we get contacts all the time about joining an IEP meeting, and ultimately, that's not necessarily our mission. Our mission is to help prepare a parent to prepare for an IEP meeting. And we'll go through, and I'll get on Zoom, and we'll share a student's MIGs, the data that's collected. And then look at the IEP and come up with some suggestions and options for the team to consider. Now, if we do join an IEP meeting, just know that an OPC advocate is not a member of that team. Our job when we attend meetings is to ensure understanding, make sure that everyone is clear as to what is the process. If anything, maybe clarify questions, comments, just to make sure that the student, if applicable, is understanding what is the process and what is being said. Because honestly, special education is a second language. And when I say 504 and IEPs, and then least restrictive environment, LRE and FAPE, those are big concepts that are part of another training we have that not everybody truly understands. And so we just want to make sure that anybody that's there has a better understanding of the process and what is being said. So again, for an OPC advocate to come to a meeting, we may offer suggestions and options for the team to consider, and that's it. That's it. But we want to be able to open up a line of communication again, because we want to make sure that when we leave a team meeting, we've done no harm. So that's our role.
So what if you had a family that might speak like Spanish? How would they access your, how would they contact you or access your services?
We have 3 fantastic advocates that are on staff that speak Spanish, and we generally route those calls straight to one of those 3 ladies.
Awesome. What if a family speaks a different language or like might use like ASL, American Sign Language? How would that work?
Again, we have actually the associate director of the organization, Ellen Kimbrell. Her son is deaf, and she knows signs. So oftentimes she'll be a liaison for that particular case. Again, but if the student has a disability such as requiring language interpretation, then yes, she'd be a part of that too.
Cool. Um, what would you say is probably your most common, you're contacted by families about what's the most common thing that families contact you about, would you say?
Oh, it's a variety of different things, but oftentimes we're finding little guys that have significant behavioral issues, and they are being sent home for a reset. Come back tomorrow. Or they have shortened their days because, their stamina is not such that they can stay a full day in school. When a team changes a placement and changes a student from a full day to a half day, the State Department has significant language in the policies and procedures about what must be done beforehand and how is the IEP written to ensure that that student has a strong transition plan back to school, and that it's successful and that they can receive free and appropriate public education. Now, if a student is being sent home repeatedly due to behavior and is being suspended, maybe in-school suspension, or is just being sent home, that is an informal suspension and must be addressed by the IEP team. Again, free and appropriate public education. If that student's placement continues to be changed from public school to home, then and think of it too, if a parent is at risk of losing a job because they're constantly being called to pick up their student because of behavior, that could be in conflict with faith. And the student is required to receive that full free and appropriate public education and receive supports, behavioral supports, and a positive behavioral intervention plan to stay in school. Child find is another one. They maybe made multiple requests verbally. We would like to have our student be tested. Per the law, their parents should make those requests in writing. And on our website, again, under the parent tab in communication, we have sample letters where a parent can pick up one of our sample letters and say, I'm requesting an initial evaluation for my child. And again, this activates Child Find. They suspect that a student has a disability, and we're looking for those sample letters that, you don't have to use it word for word. You can wordsmith it and make it as short or as easy as you want. But ultimately, you're notifying the school district that you require the student to be reevaluated. We've got sample letters on there about requesting a IEP team review, a meeting, requesting your student's file, student records. You have a right to receive those. So we've got lots of sample letters in there. And when you are dealing with special education, it's always important to make sure communication is documented. So child find, behavior, the IEP being compliant, is it being followed? Is the parent being heard? So there's that conflict resolutions that need to be addressed, and ensuring that we're all focused on the child.
What conflict resolution services does the Oklahoma Parent Center offer?
So oftentimes we're all trained in crucial conversations, and that is offered through the Special Education Resolution Center. And I believe that's a free training, and I think you could do it on Zoom. But crucial conversations allows us to kind of step away from a conversation that might be getting heated, or we're preparing for a conversation, and understanding that everyone is going to come to a discussion with a different viewpoint. They're going to have different experiences, and that's what's basing their how they're listening to things. And knowing that a parent who may have significant past trauma is going to be somewhat overstimulated and dysregulated because their student is being sent home again. The school district understanding that they are at a very emotional state, and how we can trauma informed listen and then communicate with the parent in a more effective manner. So we subscribe to crucial conversations.
Where could we find the crucial conversations? I found cruciallearning.com, or is that
conversations? So under the Special Education Resolution Center of Oklahoma, so they too are funded through the federal and state departments of education for dispute resolution. And they are the ones that would, if a parent makes a request for a facilitated IEP meeting, where a facilitator would come and help keep the focus on the present with the child and help keep the team moving forward. Mediation, they'll provide mediations, which is another one of your procedural safeguards, where a parent is requesting mediation. They're requesting that the district provide certain services, or they have some complaints and they want the team to come together to provide to resolve those issues. For example, there might be that change of placement again. They want to mediate, make sure that the district is providing a functional behavioral assessment and an FBA and a BIP before they ever send that kid home again. So through mediation and with a federally trained mediator will come and help facilitate that. And then the due process. Due process is again that quasi-judicial hearing process with a hearing officer essentially suing this district, making sure that those conflicts are resolved. I wouldn't recommend a due process. We would much rather prefer that families go through, a facilitated or mediated IEP meeting before they ever got to that.
What is the difference between a facilitated IEP meeting and a mediated IEP meeting?
Well, ultimately, the district is communicating with the parent. They're going to do some things. They're going to make a resolution of things that they will do to to resolve the complaints of a parent. It's somewhat similar. It's almost as similar to a state complaint too, where, you've got some complaints, parts of IDEA has been potentially been compromised, and what is going to be the resolution that you're asking the district to provide. So there's subtle differences, and then there's and actually, I would recommend that you ask Dr. Allison Conch, who's the director of CERT, to come and do a training. She would be fantastic.
That was on my radar. I didn't know that that this organization existed. That's fabulous. I really appreciate
We
that.
work very closely with CERT as well with the State Department. So yeah, we've got a great relationship with both organizations.